AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Hello and welcome to another special cybersecurity episode of the AI and Action podcast. I am your host, John Petherbridge. In today's episode, I speak with Ian Trinder, a director at PwC specialising in third-party risk management among other areas of cybersecurity. We discuss third-party risk management pre, during and post-Covid-19 and how businesses should respond in these uncertain times.
Yes, thanks, John. My name is Ian Trinder. I'm a director with PwC here in Dublin. I work in our technology and cybersecurity consulting group, and I suppose I focus across a different number of areas across IT and cybersecurity, around like governance, risk, compliance, and third-party risk management. So I've in college I studied business information systems, which for me was sort of a natural kind of way to merge an interest in a broader business background as well as some IT and sort of security concepts as well. So it was a nice way of merging those two together and giving me kind of a broader starting point. And then coming out of college, I went in the Big Four route, obviously, and I spent a good chunk of my career in the IT audit and assurance world. And I suppose, throughout my career, I've stayed close to the broader IT assurance, IT risk management, IT governance, and that's really kind of merged into the areas of sort of cybersecurity and third-party risk management. Particularly in the last sort of 2, 3, 4 years, I've spent a huge amount of time really focused on cybersecurity and third-party risk management as kind of main areas of focus for myself.
Okay. And how did you kind of transition into that area of cybersecurity from the IT audit side of things?
It's a good question, and I'd say overall it was a fairly natural progression for me. Like obviously when you're looking, you're helping your clients from an IT assurance and IT audit perspective, it covers a number of areas, through your IT operational processes and your change management processes. You are looking at a number of governance areas and risk management, but you also have a huge part of that is within information security, physical security, and now it's starting to really focus on cybersecurity as well. So it was sort of there are two areas to me that are not worlds apart, and it's a kind of a nice way to transition into a more specialist cybersecurity role. Like I myself have, I suppose, throughout my career have maintained a level of I suppose a range across a lot of those topics, because that's that's my own sort of approach to things. I've got colleagues and friends who've kind of gone the same road as me, but they've really gone into more specific areas, particularly within cybersecurity. They may have gone down very technical streams, with penetration testing, or identity and access management, or some of those other real deep technological kind of streams within cyber and IT more broadly as well.
So I guess kind of true to kind of business information systems, this is may seem like more of a logical step from a cybersecurity perspective for yourself, does it?
Yeah, like for me, the beauty of starting off in college with something like business information systems was, again, I use that word range, and that's always an area, I suppose, or something that I always like to see myself as someone who kind of sits across a range of different areas as opposed to one particular stream, and that's just my own preference. And business information systems, when you're coming to college straight out of school and looking at a course like that, you're focused on a number of business kind of domains like accounting, management accounting, economics. You do a little bit of marketing, things like that, but then you can pivot into a lot more technical subjects as well. Some coding practices, Java, Visual Basic, and then there's a lot of like security modules, business analysis modules, systems analysis modules, things like that as well. And again, like I did that in UCC, but I think across a lot of those programs across Ireland, you can sort of pick and choose a little bit of how you align yourself within them. So a lot of people would have done them and ended up going very heavy down the business route. Other people would have gone heavy down the technology route. But it provides a good opportunity for flexibility and to kind of build range early in your career.
So like, what is third-party risk management, and how is it important to in like a cybersecurity context?
Yeah, well, look, I suppose third-party risk management really comes back to the concept very broadly of outsourcing. And now, depending who you're speaking to or where you're reading, outsourcing can have very specific meanings. But just to use the 10,000-foot view of outsourcing, you're shipping processes, technology or data over to a third party or a vendor or a supplier. Obviously, there's traditional manufacturing and heavy goods where outsourcing is also, the physical supply chain and things like that. But certainly from a IT and cyber context, it's about engaging with third parties, again, to help kind of run inefficient or cost heavy processes, to deploy specific technologies, to take advantage of skills and capabilities that you don't have within your own organization. So that entire sort of concept of outsourcing within IT and business in general is not necessarily a new concept. It's been around 30, 40 plus years. I think the more sort of focus on risk management around third parties is probably a little bit of a newer concept within the last sort of 5-10 years. And what that really is it's about an organization kind of putting a framework and management process around managing the risk associated with third parties that you're engaged with. So we typically look at it, from a process perspective or a framework perspective. It's looking at how you manage a third party or a supplier from sort of the full life cycle, right, from end to end. So you're starting off up front, you're doing your planning exercises, understanding, is this a process or a technology that we can really outsource? Is it going to stay within a risk appetite? Is there going to be other hidden gotchas or hidden risks that we'll find if we do outsource it, or if we engage a third party? Once you've kind of gotten through that and you've made the decision that you need to engage a third party or you need to outsource something, it's around that due diligence. So you're going through and understanding the various vendors who can support you. You're getting comfortable whether those vendors are going to increase your risk profile, or whether there's risky areas within those vendors that you may not be comfortable with dealing with them. That flows into your contracting and your SLA phase. So you're making sure you're setting your own company up for success, that you're putting the right framework in place to manage that. You're putting the right metrics, targets, all that kind of good stuff around that to make sure that you're able to manage that risk on an ongoing basis. And then probably, I suppose, the chunkiest piece of the framework, where most of the work goes into, is your ongoing governance, your ongoing monitoring of those third parties. So you've gotten through the contracting stage, you're live. It's about establishing a cadence and a rhythm to apply the appropriate governance over those third parties or suppliers, whether it's meeting with them weekly, monthly, or whatever that might be, to understand, I suppose there's a performance angle to this, absolutely, to make sure that they're hitting various SLAs and targets that they've agreed to from a performance perspective. But there's very much a risk management focus here as well. Are you building relationships with those third parties on a frequent basis, that there's open dialogue around risks? You're creating a culture where risks, particularly security risks, can be discussed and can be triaged and actioned. And then sort of, probably once a year, or could be more frequent depending on the risk associated with the service of the third party, you're then doing sort of a kind of a deeper dive risk assessment, or some sort of like an audit of that third party, looking at their sort of IT security controls, other areas as well that would be in scope, various other kind of risk domains that you'd want to get some coverage and comfort over, and executing that kind of on an annual basis, or a continuous basis is probably a better way of framing it. And then finally, it's that termination phase. So we're ending our relationship with this third party supplier. How do we do that in a proper way that's not creating extra risk for the business? Making sure that we're turning off the taps in terms of data going out to them. We're bringing back any data that we've already given away, or not given away, but that we've that the third party is managing for us. Yeah, exactly. And you're managing your risks around that process properly as well. And then obviously within that phase as well, you're kind of making sure that you can do that in a relatively quick manner as well, if that's what needs to happen. If there's sort of going concern with the third party or something to that effect as well. So that's I suppose from a broader risk management perspective, what it means. Obviously, then cyber is a major subset within that. And when I say cyber, I mean cyber, privacy, physical security, information security. I think, once organizations have outsourced a process, or they've engaged with a third party for technology, or bringing in people, there's data involved, there's customer data involved, so there's risk around that. So I think it's really important from a cybersecurity perspective, from and an IT perspective, that's really being managed properly. I think the phrase I very often use when I'm speaking to clients is, you can outsource pretty much everything except for accountability. And what I mean by that is, if you have outsourced a process or technology to a third party and they have a security incident or a breach and they lose that data, ultimately you are accountable to your own customers and potentially to your regulators as well if that data is gone. So it's a critical element of the entire kind of third party risk management spectrum as well.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, accountability is everything. I guess having all the information backed up at the different stages and steps that have been taken is such a big part of it. Obviously, yeah, you've been doing the risk management side, business risk management for quite some time. Are there any kind of specific challenges that you've kind of seen evolve over the last few years, or any new challenges that have come up that haven't been there, let's say 2 or 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, there's I suppose there is the absolute truth. I think it's an evolving discipline. Like I said, it's some of the more mature organizations have been doing this for sort of maybe 10 years, give or take. Others are sort of coming to the table now and trying to stand up programs, and there's others in between. I think it is definitely it's a growing area in terms of complexity, and the number of challenges are increasing. I suppose maybe 3 to call out. It's not necessarily an exhaustive list, but the first is, I suppose, just the kind of digital transformation agenda, and the way that companies are now starting to do business is really shifting from where it was a few years ago. I think companies are now becoming increasingly more interconnected with each other through use of like cloud platforms and technologies, through other digital ways of doing business. So I think when you consider the footprint you have, or the estate of third parties you have, that's increased probably significantly in the last few years as a result of that. And likewise, you're now you're engaging third parties in a way that you weren't previously. And you're seeing a lot of banks partnering up with like fintechs or startups, which is a relatively new concept. So that's driven, I think that's driven a number of challenges, and it's created a number of work streams and things for organizations to focus on, to kind of manage risks around that. The second area I would call out is the regulatory focus over the last sort of maybe 2 to 3 years, broadly speaking. A couple of big ones, if you're in financial services, there's 2 major regulatory frameworks relevant here: the CBI's outsourcing framework and the European Banking Authority's outsourcing framework. So that's for your banks and your asset managers and others in the financial services space. That's put a real focus around managing your programs with a level of diligence and increased rigor that probably didn't exist previously. Creates challenges, and obviously there's costs associated with that, and there's resources associated with that. So that's been a driver. And then the other major regulatory one is GDPR itself. So GDPR is one that everybody will be familiar with at this point. But again, when a lot of organizations went through discovery process, understanding where their data is going, who's accessing the data and who's managing the data, like there was a lot of uncovered sort of 4th and 5th parties, if you want to call them that. Like if you think about the supply chain, who your sort of chain outsourcers are, and I suppose it's just purely from a regulatory management perspective, there's huge fines around issues with losing data or data breaches. So that's created a major focus, and I suppose it's a major challenge, but it's created a major focus from organizations in standing up good and robust processes that can kind of manage some of those risks. And then I suppose the third one I would kind of just call out and it's really from a security perspective, but it's the increasing level of customer expectation. So again, like GDPR is a great example where it's really made your everyday consumers a lot more aware of their rights to privacy, and their rights to their own data. So there is now a built-in expectation from customers, the every person on the street, that companies they're engaging with are managing their own data properly. Likewise, there's a kind of from a technology perspective, there's a customer expectation around availability of processes and services, around the proper functioning and efficient functioning of processes and services. So again, if you're engaging a third party who's managing an application on your behalf, and that third party is having availability issues or resilience issues, or are not able to get a service online, that creates challenges from a kind of a customer trust and a customer expectations perspective. So again, another major focus there. There, like I said, and there are more, but there are three sort of banner ones that I call out as major kind of challenges at the moment that we're seeing across our clients.
All right. Okay. And so we're actually recording this yet in phase one of the restrictions being lifted in the pandemic that is COVID-19. So we've had about 10, 11 weeks of working remotely at this stage. How has COVID-19 impacted third-party risk management?
Well, it's impacted it significantly. I think your supply chain and the resilience of your supply chain and your third parties is a huge focus. I think, look, COVID has changed everything in the short term, and as you and me were chatting about previously, it can change everything, and it can change a lot of things in the longer term as well, which is a kind of a reality we're all understanding now, just in terms of how we work and whatnot. We kind of spoke about our own working remotely situations and all of that, but I suppose you think about the sort of spectrum of risks that COVID brings up, and the first one you have to consider there really is the challenges of working remotely and the security considerations around that. Like, how do you, if I'm a security manager or a CISO in an organization, how do I get all of the employees in that organization connected to the network in a safe and secure way that is not increasing the risk profile of the company if they were sitting in their own office or connected to the corporate network. So there's massive challenges around that internally, but if you kind of start thinking more broadly, and thinking about your portfolio of your various third parties and suppliers, you need to have a level of visibility into how all of those suppliers are also doing the same thing, how they're managing their own staff, right? Because I suppose your attack surface is expanded dramatically when you're engaged with third parties. So there's a huge challenge around that. I think even more broadly, what we've seen across our own network, through our knowledge sharing and our various leadership meetings across our firm, is there's increased activity around COVID related attacks and phishing attacks and smishing attacks and all that kind of stuff. That's increased, in multiples, since the start of COVID. Obviously, bad actors out there are very opportunistic. They look constantly for opportunities where people are feeling vulnerable, or people are in an uncertain time, and there's probably no more better example of that than COVID, in recent times on a mass scale, certainly. So that's driving a major increase in just the level of activity that we're seeing. And again, you consider when, from a third party perspective, you have to be comfortable that your third party is aware of that as well, that they're aware of those increased level of attacks and the level of sophistication of those attacks. So you talk about like, how are you comfortable that the employees within your third parties are aware of that, right? So there's challenges around that I think translate through the supply chain. I think more broadly speaking, just the overall resilience of the supply chain. So I talked about that. Obviously we think, typically when we think of supply chain, we think about how our grapes or apples get from the farm to our supermarket and into our homes. There's a very similar kind of concept when you think about IT and how processes are delivered, be it through financial institutions or technology companies or whatever kind of industry. And there's a kind of an old saying that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And that's very relevant to the supply chain. So if you don't have proper visibility of all the various players that have a role in getting your process, out to your customers, or your services out to your customers, you have challenges there. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that there are businesses that are struggling in COVID. It's hard to turn on the news without seeing the impact it's having economically. So how do you kind of get comfortable around the viability and all of that of your supply chain. I think that's creating the very specific challenges that we're seeing. And then finally, I suppose just, within suppliers that are engaged with, large swaths of the market, they when they have, limited capacity, they're, working off reduced headcount themselves, limited, or I should say decreased processing power, they'll also have to prioritize what services go out, right? So if you're not in that sort of top priority for your third parties, you may be working off reduced capacity, or you may be receiving services in a less efficient way than you previously did in the past. So they're sort of some of the kind of, again, the highlight areas. Not to say it's exhaustive, but some of the things we've been hearing, from speaking to clients and just broadly observing the market.
Yeah, it is just it's such a strange time. There's so many kind of knock-on effects, and especially when you go into the likes of third-party risk management, that's all about the knock-on. It's all about like the degrees of separation and how further down the chain different businesses are impacted in different ways.
Yep.
So what, I guess, in the last number of weeks, what's the type of recommendations that you've been making to the businesses you're engaging with to help mitigate these newfound risks around COVID-19?
Yeah, well, look, I think the first place I'd start with, and I'll maybe call out a few examples, but the first place I'd start with is just around that security awareness, right? And that culture of security awareness and security risk management. We're seeing our clients and other organizations doing a good job of creating content and messages internally to, as I spoke to those increased phishing attacks and COVID-related phishing attacks, to be diligent and all of that. But that does need to extend to your third parties as well. You need to, again, kind of get comfort that your third parties are managing that in the same way that you would be internally, where, your own suppliers are also working remotely, making sure if you have like a clean desk policy, that you operate your own organization, that's being extended to your supply chain. So there's not confidential documents that are being printed out and left around common areas or things like that might create challenges for the organization.
Yeah, that's like the accountability piece, isn't it? So
it is, yeah, exactly.
Or spreading that awareness, yeah.
Exactly, because you're ultimately accountable if you have issues there. And then I would say the second area would be just kind of around, understanding the resilience of your supply chain, right? So we talked about that, the kind of the hidden gotchas are being as strong as your weakest link. So I think understanding where some of your suppliers are going to be having difficulties and challenges at the moment, it could be across a number of areas, but at least understanding those and hopefully, you'll have built good relationships with your third parties that you can have honest, risk-based conversations with them, that people are, forthright about challenges and all of that, but kind of just maybe understanding where those resilience challenges may be, and where you could potentially fall down, or where your company could fall down sort of, as a result of some of those knock-on challenges. I think, kind of coming out of that, the third area would just be like understanding what your kind of workaround, your fallback plan would be. If you do encounter some areas like that, whether it be, repatriation of services, if that's a potential option, or whether there's a similar company that you could potentially engage with at a relatively short notice to keep your processes and services up and running if that's what you need to do. More sort of the kind of peeking around corners and making sure you're sort of aware of what could potentially happen. And then I suppose the last kind of thing that we've been kind of discussing with clients, particularly in the last few weeks since, the initial kind of shock of COVID and all that has worn off a little bit, is what's the sort of long-term impact and what's this going to mean for my third-party risk management function in the longer term. What are some of the things that we can learn from this that will make us a stronger organization or a stronger function going forward? And maybe, maybe your organization has had issues with a specific third party, and there's lessons learned from that that might change your approach. But I think now is sort of the time to start thinking about that, to start mapping through where that long-term impact might be, and how you might take some of the lessons learned through this pandemic unforeseen situation and really make the organization a little bit stronger in the future.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's taking what positive can we take from this, and what will the future look like in a way that we're more robust. So yeah, Ian, look, thanks so much. This has been super insightful. Really practical advice as well, I believe, just that any real business that can take into account. So, look, thanks so much for your time, Ian. And hopefully we get to do this again.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, John.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.